Hi, my guest today is Dr. Marci Kirk. She's the Assistant Director for Recent Graduate Initiatives for the AVMA. Welcome, Dr. Kirk. I'm so happy to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm really eager to talk to you because you and I spoke before, and we chose our topic as being isolation. And you shared a story of a time with me when, as a veterinarian, you felt very isolated. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's really funny because I think most people that meet me, I have a very bubbly, positive personality. So they're like, "Why is isolation your word?" But right when I graduated, there you go through veterinary school, and I think this is true for many people. You go through school and you have this cohort that you're with, and then you're sort of out on your own, doing your own thing, and it can feel very isolating. And so I already had that sort of feeling, and then I think I was out when the incident happened. I think I was out a couple years, but I think I was out about 4 years when I had a board complaint come through. And for people that aren't familiar with that, because it goes by different names in different states and everything. So as a veterinarian and sometimes other professionals, you are licensed to practice in a specific state. And in order to do that, you had to pass boards and everything, and you want to keep your license because that's how you are able to make your living. And many people think about, if you think about a human physician that might be sued for malpractice, and that can happen, but it's very rare in the animal world. What's more common is to have what's called a board or a license complaint. And so what that is the board is set up to protect the public. And so anyone can, if they're unhappy or feel that the standard of care was not met for their pet, they can lodge a complaint with the board, and the board has to investigate it. So I received a notice that a case that I had worked on with 2 other veterinarians was going in front of the board. And that really shook my confidence being so soon out. I'd been involved in the veterinary profession and the animal world since I was 15, had wanted to be a veterinarian my whole life, and had never met anyone who had been through this experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt very alone, and I was embarrassed. And I thought we talked about this in our pre-call, but I suffer very much from like perfectionist and black and white thinking. So I mean, you're either a good doctor or you get a board complaint.
Yeah.
And so, I'm just going through like, oh my gosh, how did I fail this pet? How did I fail this client? And I feel very lucky because I did have what's called licensure defense. So I had insurance that provided me with a lawyer to help me through this entire process, because this was the first time I'd ever gone through something. Again, didn't know anyone who'd gone through it, so couldn't base off this. But this lawyer, that's what he does every day. So he was very well versed in it. So that helped a little. And the other 2 veterinarians on the complaint did not have the licensure defense. So I was the only one that showed up, and it all ended up well. I didn't have any repercussions. They have to research those things. It's there to set up to protect the public. And I totally understand that and respect the process. But it was really hard for me. It was a hard time, and I was very emotional about it. So it took me a long time to talk about it. And I kind of regret that, because if I had reached out to my network and I had actually, when I finally was able to talk about it, I was in this program called Power of 10 through the Illinois State Veterinary Medical Association, where they take 10 veterinarians who are pretty recently out and sort of develop communication and leadership skills. And what I learned is most board complaints come from communication breakdowns. So I was like, well, this is something that's for me. Anyway, I was talking to a couple of the people in my cohort, and it turns out there was 4 of us that had already been through the board complaint process. And had I spoken up sooner, I don't know if they would have felt better, because theirs were, in the past and mine was pretty recent, but I certainly felt better because I look at them, I'm like, those are excellent doctors. These are great people. And whether or not a mistake was made, they're still good people. And it just really helped me. And so that's really what drove me part of the way to this role at the AVMA, because I really struggled with that transition from school into my profession. And I'm hoping that I can help at a national level develop resources, or even just by sharing my story, to hear people that people can hear it and not feel so alone, because for me, I'm very much an extrovert, and even if you're an introvert and recharge by yourself, you still need that community, and it's hard when you don't feel like you have it. So it was a really, really tough time, but I, I can say this now, of course. I am thankful to have gone through it, because I can speak from experience, and I've had a friend recently that went through it and was able to be there for her in a very meaningful way, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it's very traumatic experience to have your qualifications sort of called into question, and it can bring up some of our internal doubts. So
Yes.
tell me a little bit about how it affected you a little bit more deeply, if you could share a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think most of us are pretty good at projecting confidence, but I certainly do struggle with imposter syndrome, and never thinking I know quite enough, or never quite sure of myself. And, your first year out from any degree, you're really learning, how to hold this position. And so I really felt like I was kind of hitting my stride. By the time this complaint came through, I was at a different practice, but I was basically practicing on my own a couple days a week. And so I was like, look at this. I didn't think I'd like being by myself, but I really enjoyed it. And then that came, and honestly, it really shook me. I really, really struggled. I had trouble sleeping, and I had trouble eating, which, if anyone has met me, that is not something I struggle with ever. Um, and I mean, the sleep was really hard, but I feel really bad about this, but every time I walked into a room, then part of my brain was always processing, like, okay, how are they going to come after me? How is this going to be perceived? So I was like, I'm not practicing my best medicine, I don't feel like, because I'm always on the defense. So I went from like, okay, let's talk about what all these options are, to being like, this is the gold standard and this is what I would recommend. We can certainly talk about other options, but if we want to be thorough, so I still provided excellent care, but there was a part of me that was always just really questioning what I said and how this was going to come back to me, and things like that. I mean, it eventually, I was able to work through that, especially when I confided in some people and worked with people that had been through this before. And whenever you kind of share more details about the case, it's like, okay, actually, these steps were followed, and there was some miscommunications that we could certainly strengthen, things like that. So it had a pretty large impact on that time of my life, for sure.
Yeah, and the response that you've described is one that I think a lot of people will be able to relate to, because our brains really are wired for safety. So
Mm-hmm.
the whole idea of, I used to think this was safe to just walk in and talk to a client, and now I know it's not as safe as I thought it was. But that part that crops up and it's spending all its time chattering in the background isn't actually helpful,
No.
usually, because it's diminishing your gifts and not making you show up with all of your talents and with all of your abilities, because it's just going, play smaller, play safer,
Mm-hmm.
do what you can. So it actually isolates you even a little bit more,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which is so fascinating to me, that that isolation is a public health hazard. I mean, that the statistics on loneliness show that it is more dangerous than obesity or cigarettes. And we all talk about, we know that, we need to eat right, we need to move, we need to not smoke, we need to, but we don't talk about that we need to reach out. We need to be parts of communities. We need to have people that we can talk to about the hard stuff. And you mentioned your Power of 10 group. And I'd like you to share a little bit about what benefit there was to you in having a group that you knew would get it. Even if they
Mhm.
didn't have that experience, they would at least know where you were with it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that group too. Actually, one of them was my classmate, and she put it really well. It's even within your chosen profession or your area of a profession, you have to find your people.
Mm-hmm.
And that might change depending on what stage of your life you're at. So at that moment, those were my people, because we were going through this year-long program, and we only met in person, I think 4 or 5 times. But that is a group that I see them at conferences now sometimes and things, but that I know I could reach out. When I started this job, I wanted to do like a mini series of webinars on different topics. And I just threw it out there to that group. I'm like, would anybody be interested? I need this experience. And I had 5 responses within, minutes. And so that was really cool. And it was just a really good bonding experience because we were all early in our career, but we'd all had different experiences, but some of the same undertones, where, a lot, you hear the story a lot in veterinary medicine where the new grad comes in and then the old boss is like, okay, I got to take vacation, and you're on your own. And so a lot of, coping with that or navigating, like, it's when you're in school and learning, there's lots of levels of, okay, there's an intern and then a resident and then a clinician and then the whole hospital. So you sort of feel a little protected. When you're on your own, there's a business, but the decisions are up to you. So it can be really tough. So it's really nice to talk to people that have that medical knowledge that can kind of assure you that you made the right steps. On the flip side, I do also think it's very critical to have a community outside of your profession that
Yes.
is willing to listen to professional things, but also listen to other things. And that's one thing on our podcast that we really focus on is sometimes I'm sure this is true for you too, but you get so defined. Like when someone asks you, they're like, oh, this is such and such. Like, yeah, I'm a veterinarian. It's like, but I'm actually a lot more than that. So we always ask people, what's something you're passionate about outside of the profession? But that's, like I said, going back to the main point is, finding your people, I think is just critical. And it just enhances it. And that the friend that I was referencing, she never anticipated her career going the direction she did, but she now runs a mobile hospice and end of life care. And she's like, I would have never thought that was, but she goes, I just took a course. And then she's like, I knew right away, those were my people. This was what I was meant to do. And they get it. They understood. And she's just flourishing, and it's just awesome to see. And that's how I feel sort of about organized veterinary medicine. For me, I get to go to these conferences. I get to meet so many people from across the profession. And I'm like, this is all my people.
Yes. Yes. And I think that the phrase of like finding your people is a really important and valuable one because we can be surrounded by people and still feel isolated.
Yep. Oh, definitely.
So we need to find the ones that we can connect with and who we can share things with. And I also loved that you brought in the importance of a broad range of people, not just all people in our profession or people who think the way we do, or because sometimes we can get so stuck that we can't see other alternatives, options, or even just the bigger picture. Like this is not going to really matter in 5 years. It matters very much right now, but not in 5 years. And sometimes somebody completely outside the profession will ask questions because they just don't know, which will help us to go, oh yeah, I guess this really isn't going to matter in 5 years.
Yeah. That's such a good point that I just wanted to emphasize too, is I think that is part of the reason I felt so isolated during the board complaint, because I would be in this sea of people that were my people, quote, using air quotes, but I felt so alone because I'm like, none of them have been through this. None of them know what I'm going through. And that is the lowest, like loneliest point I ever experienced, even though I was surrounded by my people.
I'm curious, when you decided to share, did you plan it? I'm going to share at our next meeting, or did it just come up like, I have to say this?
Well, that was something that was always, always, always on my mind. It was just always there, just kind of like this creature in my head. And I just remember I forget how it came up in the group. We were talking about communication or something, and we had a lunch break, and I told my friend about it, and somebody else overheard too. And she, unknowingly, she had been through one, and then the other person had. And so it just kind of grew from there. So I don't know that I specifically planned it, but it was like always there. So I think I was always at the ready to share it. And now I intentionally share it. When I go and give presentations to veterinary students, I do try to weave it in a lot because I ask people, I said, show your hands. How many people know someone that's been through a board complaint or a license defense, type of thing? Because again, it's called different things. And I've maybe seen 1 or 2 hands, raised out of hundreds. And so I said, now you can all raise your hand because I've been through it. And I just want to tell you, it's going to be okay. This is what the process is, and make sure you have licensure defense on your malpractice insurance. So little
Yeah.
education in there too. It's become my personal soapbox.
It's good to have a personal soapbox. Mine is resilience, and I think community is a big piece of that, like having connections with one another and feeling safe in that and recognizing that piece. So one of the things that came up for me when you were talking about this, the board complaint aspect, on a smaller scale, it's the negative Yelp review.
I'm not even sure that's smaller. That's pretty public, because no one would ever know that I went through a board complaint unless I lost my license.
Mm-hmm.
But a Yelp review is pretty public, and those can escalate so quickly. And I can totally see that being, your business, it relies on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that could make someone feel very isolated and scared, and all of the negative self-talk pieces that come up. Maybe I really aren't as good as I thought I was, and create the change in behavior that you had described, where you're showing up with your clients in a different way than you would have if you felt more secure, if you felt understood and connected and supported by others. Yeah, it's a really tough thing. So, what would you say are tips for somebody who's feeling isolated and wants to find her people or his people?
Yeah, it's so different for everyone too, because I know a lot of people identify as introverts versus extroverts, and I don't want that to be a limiting factor, because you still need that connection. And so you might need it in a smaller dose, but I mean, to me, somewhat of a safer space it can be. I understand the internet's got its problems, but I mean, just joining some social media groups that are in your interests, and even just kind of what stalking them, where you lurk, you just read, you don't participate, and it makes you feel like something. I also am a big fan of podcasts and finding things outside and within your profession, listening to things. It makes you feel a part of a community without actually having to make that next step. But I think when we're allowed to go back to conferences and gatherings, I mean, just put yourself out there. There's going to be somebody else there that doesn't know anyone either. And it's just the connections that you can make and those relationships you can build. You never know where it's going to lead.
Yeah.
And so it's tough. I hate networking, again, with those air quotes. I'm terrible at it. I fumble and feel very awkward. But as soon as I can find that thing that we connect on, whether it's professional or personal, even if it's in a professional setting, I'm all in. Like, I
Yeah.
will make that relationship work and everything. So usually I try to fumble around and say, like, dogs, because I'm a big dog person, or I really like Disney and I like running. And I'm like, these are all things that we could talk about. And I kind of just like throw things out until someone latches onto something. And I'm like, okay, we've got a connection now. And it can be super awkward. There are people that make it look really easy, but just know that everyone's okay with it being awkward, even if you have to start with the weather, or, next year it's all gonna be like, wow, 2020, man, that was tough,
That was
so
tough. Yeah.
it's, we're gonna have these things that we can bond with, but it's hard taking those first steps, but it is so worth it in the end, that just challenge yourself to take those first steps.
So when you just said dogs, Disney, and running, Dr. Lori Schulte popped into my head. Do you know her?
I don't, but it sounds like maybe I should.
Dogs, Disney, and running. We'll make sure that you meet her, because that's a trifecta. At least from my perspective, I think that's one of your people.
Yeah, I would love that. I've met, it's one of the first conferences I went to in this current role that I have. I made an acquaintance, and she's like, I have someone you have to meet. And it was a veterinarian that was getting ready to run her first Disney race. And we've connected so much through that and bonded through that. And we would never have met had that friend not known I had that passion for Disney, not known she was running her first Disney race. And it's been a relationship that's been really fun. She runs the same race I do every year, and we managed to, this is typically, a 26,000 person event, and we've managed to somehow find each other and connect each year, and it's been awesome.
How fun. So I know that small moments can have really big ripples. So the moment when you decided to share this, that changed the trajectory of who you are and how you show up in the world. So I'm wondering if you can jump ahead to 2025 and look at the you that you expect you'll be, because you now have this insight about the fear that came up from this board complaint and the isolation and the importance of ending that, versus the you that might have been practicing in 2025 had you not had the realization but had the board complaint. The board complaint occurs
Mm-hmm.
and one person realizes, oh, I need to reach out, and one person doesn't. How are you different?
Well, I really think if I hadn't built, like, if go the negative way first, if I hadn't built a community and shared with anyone, I just think I'd be practicing very scared medicine. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I wouldn't be, what I really loved when I was in practice full time was the connections I made with clients and the patients. And I wouldn't be doing that. So I would not be fulfilled, which means for me professionally, if I'm not fulfilled, personally, I'm not going to be fulfilled. I'm not going to be the best version of myself. I'm sure I would have some very unhealthy habits. My sleep hygiene would be off the chart bad. But having built a community, I mean, I'm not saying it's always sunshine and perfect. And
Nothing ever is.
yeah, I certainly have to reach out quite a bit. And I hope, you never know the impact you're having on other people, but I hope I'm there for plenty of people, because it is the little things to just listen. And
Mm-hmm.
so I hope I provide that to other people, but maybe never even have the knowledge that I've done that. So I definitely, and I've noticed, because I do some relief work still, that, my demeanor is a lot different. I want to make those connections. I want to do the best that I can. And it's going to be okay if things go sideways sometimes, because I've experienced it, and it's going to be okay. And that doesn't mean I'm a bad doctor. It might mean I have some things to learn, whether it's communication or skills or other things like that. And it might just be that you caught someone on a bad day. We're all going through things, and they might have had something else that was really bad going on, but this was the thing they focused on. And it's unfortunate, but we've all been there, where it's like, you're not really yelling at the customer service person. You're not really upset with them. There's something else bigger going on. So trying to see the bigger picture. And my community has really helped with that. So I probably am guilty of oversharing maybe a little, but I hope that I repay that to people too.
Yeah, I think there's a real power in listening and sharing. There's something amazing about helping, about bearing witness, um, and helping people know that they're not alone in tough times, and that others have experienced something, not necessarily the same thing, because it is different for each of us, but nobody makes it through life without any pain or any struggle. And when we can show up and say, I'm sorry that this is your difficult moment, can I just be with you? um, that that can be very powerful. I think it's one of the elements I'm really trying to build in my groups, in the Unleashed Resilience community, and also in the small group coaching programs. I think my small group coaching is probably not unlike your Power of 10, where it will be people working together to all make changes, and to make changes in a safe way, with
Mm-hmm.
with layered growth. And I think that element comes largely from the community, from taking away that sense of isolation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So isolation also occurs, like, within professions, uh, um, like silos between professions.
Mm-hmm.
So veterinarians know veterinarians, dog trainers know dog trainers, groomers know groomers. What impact would it have if we did a better job as the big group of pet professionals of really trying to reach out and establish some connections with other pet professionals who are in different fields?
Yeah, this is something I really love, how my co-host on our podcast says it, but she likes to look at it from an abundance mentality, and that we can elevate each other. And
Mhm.
veterinarians are very busy, as are many other animal professionals, because pets have risen to being, part of the family.
Yes.
And there are certainly times and many of our personalities, I'm going to generalize a little bit, in veterinary medicine, we want to solve everything. We want to fix it all. And we want you to be happy and your pet to be healthy and have that bond just really strong. But there are certainly things that are beyond what, like I've been trained, and there might be veterinary professionals. So I know veterinarians that have gone on to do behavior things, but I think if we could have a whole care team and people that you trust, if someone comes with you with a puppy and they're like, I really want to do some puppy training, but you don't offer it at your clinic, you want to know that there's a trainer or a facility or an organization that can really help them provide good care.
Mm-hmm.
And then, same with like grooming. If you don't provide grooming, that's a really place where a lot of things can go sideways too.
Yes. Yes.
And so
we do want good, fear-free groomers out there.
Yeah.
Makes a huge difference for veterinary care and just for quality of life.
Yep. So it's like, if you, as a veterinary professional, go into a new community, it's really smart to get to know who aligns with your vision and beliefs as well, so that you can make those knowledgeable recommendations. And sometimes it's just personal fit too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
There was a dog trainer I loved. I took my own dog there in Central Illinois when we had the best time, and we would do fun classes and we'd do other class, like actual training classes. And I would recommend them because I had great personal experience, but sometimes those personalities don't jive,
Yeah.
so they might need
Got to
something
find your
else.
people.
Yeah. So just having a list that you can give people and they can, figure out what works for them, I think is really helpful, because it is, a team approach, in my opinion, is always better. And then that frees the veterinarian up to really focus on the medicine, because sometimes behavioral issues are medically related, and sometimes they are strictly just behavior, and sometimes it's a combination that you need both to come together. And so you got to work
Mm-hmm.
closely with the team, and maybe that's not an area that particular veterinarian feels strongly about, so they need to bring in more people to understand that. But sometimes it's hard to have that humility. So we always say, and this is from Anna, my co-host, she's like, the abundance mentality and an attitude of gratitude. So those are the things that I think can serve us all really, really well. So yeah.
I agree completely. And I think that's a great spot to wrap up. The abundance mentality and an attitude of gratitude really is what we all need all the time. So if people want to learn more about you and your work, how could they do that?
Sure. So my email is mkirk@avma.org, and I am on there regularly. And the website, that it's mostly focused on veterinarians that are just starting their career, but I think there's some great advice in there just in general on well-being and finances and career. And that's myveterinarylife.com.
Great. Thank you so much, Marci. I really appreciate you coming on Unleashed at Work at Home today.
Thanks for having me.